The day Noah Pippin walked away, it didn't feel like the start of a mystery. He wasn't the kind of kid people expected to vanish. Smart, grounded, the type who knew the trails and could read a map without pulling out his phone. But September 15th, 2010, would unravel that image piece by piece. Some who saw him that afternoon in Montana remember he looked restless, not in a panicked way, but with the weight of someone carrying thoughts they weren't ready to say out loud. His phone went quiet soon after. No texts, no updates. For his family, that was the first red flag. Search teams combed through vast stretches of open land, the kind of wilderness where miles can swallow people whole. They called his name into the wind, scanned every ridge, and studied the scattered campfire remnants they found along the way. It wasn't enough. Days became weeks. Weeks became a season. And just like that, people began to talk about him, in the past tense. Then came the strange tip. A sighting, not in Montana, but hundreds of miles away. A boy matching Noah's description, seen with a man in his 20s. The witness couldn't remember the plates, but she was certain about one thing. The two didn't look like strangers. They looked like they'd been traveling together for a while. At first, no one knew what to make of it. Was Noah in trouble? Was this man holding him? Or had he chosen to be there? The questions turned into arguments behind closed doors. Theories split in two directions. One darker, one almost unthinkably simple. But both left the same uneasy truth. Nobody really knew Noah anymore, not in the way they thought they did. Months later, a clearer picture began to emerge. But it wasn't the one anyone expected. By the time winter set in, the search for Noah Pippin had lost the frantic energy of the first weeks. Official searches had slowed, but his story hadn't stopped moving. Somewhere in the background, whispers kept surfacing. Sightings, overheard conversations, fragments of a trail no one could quite follow. One of the most unsettling leads came from a hiker passing through a rest area. He swore he'd seen Noah, thinner now, face sharper, clothes dusty and worn, talking quietly to a man near an older model sedan. They weren't arguing, they weren't hiding, but there was a strange, unspoken urgency in their body language. The man, later identified by some as Andrew Tafoya, seemed protective of Noah, almost shielding him from casual glances. It was the kind of clue that sparked more questions than it answered. If Noah was in danger, why hadn't he bolted when there were people around? If he wasn't, then why no call home? No message to say he was safe? Meanwhile, his family wrestled with two unbearable possibilities: that Noah was being held against his will, or that he had chosen to vanish. Neither explanation felt like the boy they knew. And yet, the wilderness changes people. Living outside the reach of ordinary life can strip away old loyalties and create new ones, sometimes in the most unexpected alliances. Investigators were careful with their theories. No crime scene, no ransom demands, no sign of a struggle. It was a case that refused to fit the usual patterns. Every time it seemed about to turn toward a clear resolution, it doubled back into shadow. And then, months after that rest area sighting, another tip came in. One that would finally break the story wide open. It was a tip so specific, so detailed, that it could only mean one thing: Noah was alive. The lead that finally cracked the silence didn't come from a law enforcement database or a professional tracker. It came from someone who had no idea their casual encounter would be the missing piece. It happened in a small, weathered town that wasn't on any obvious path. The witness was just fueling up, minding their own business, when they noticed two figures coming out of a corner store. The taller one, older, maybe mid-20s, carried himself with a quiet confidence, head on a swivel, scanning the lot as if reading it for threats. The younger one trailed just behind, not in a hurry, but not quite relaxed either. The way they moved together made it impossible to mistake. They weren't strangers. Later, the witness saw a missing persons flyer tacked to a notice board. The younger face staring back at them was the same boy from the gas station, Noah Pippin. And that older man? The name clicked immediately when law enforcement connected the dots, Andrew Tafoya. When deputies followed up, the trail led them to a makeshift camp tucked deep into an area that most people wouldn't dare to hike alone. It was more than a campsite. It was a living space, organized, stocked with supplies, even modest comforts. They'd been there a while. Finding Noah there was surreal. He wasn't chained, he wasn't bruised. He didn't look like a hostage. In fact, he spoke freely, cautious at first, but calm. He made it clear this wasn't a kidnapping. He'd chosen to stay. It wasn't the ending most people imagined. No whispered confessions about danger or abuse. No dramatic rescue in the dead of night. Instead, the story was one of escape. Not from danger, but from the life he'd left behind. Still, the choice stirred unease. Why leave without a word? Why vanish so completely that your own family believes you might be dead? Noah didn't offer the kind of answers that close a wound. He just confirmed the most important fact. He was alive. Noah's reappearance should have been the kind of moment that erases all the agony of the past year. But it didn't work that way. When word reached his family, the relief was instant, almost overwhelming. But relief gave way to confusion so quickly, it felt like emotional whiplash. They'd been living in a kind of suspended grief for over 12 months, picturing him lost, imagining worst-case scenarios, bargaining with fate. And now, here he was, not only alive, but seemingly content in a life he'd chosen for himself. That joy they'd waited for was tangled with a deep, cutting question. Why wasn't coming home part of his plan? Some family members clung to the hope that this was temporary, that once the adrenaline of survival wore off, he'd feel the pull of home. Others quietly feared he'd already crossed a threshold he couldn't or wouldn't return from. Law enforcement, having confirmed there was no crime, stepped back. To them, the case was closed. But for the people who loved Noah, it was just the start of another chapter. One where they'd have to accept that knowing where he was didn't mean they could reach him. Then there was the matter of Andrew Tafoya. To outsiders, he was an enigma. The man who had traveled with Noah across state lines, lived alongside him in the wilderness, and somehow earned his trust so completely. Friends speculated. Some whispered that Andrew was a dangerous influence. Others believed he'd been a kind of protector, helping Noah survive away from civilization. Noah didn't give interviews. He didn't explain the bond. He didn't tell the story in a way that made it easy for anyone to settle on a simple truth. In the quiet aftermath, people were left with competing versions of the same reality: that Noah had been found alive, but not in the way they'd hoped. And for some, that was almost harder to live with than the not knowing. If this story gripped you, don't just let it fade into the background noise. Noah Pippin's year-long disappearance wasn't just a headline. It was a haunting reminder that sometimes the people we think we know can vanish into a life we never saw coming. Tap like if you believe every missing person's story deserves to be told in full. Drop a comment if you have your own theory about why Noah chose the path he did. And hit subscribe so you're here when we uncover the next case that will leave you questioning everything you thought you understood. Because sometimes the truth isn't hiding in the dark, it's walking right past us,